Chapter 29. The Wisdom of the Porch. The years had softened the edges of the conflicts, but they hadn't dimmed the intensity of the love. Brock and Barbara Jean had moved into a house just down the street, a house that Brock had personally retrofitted to be safety compliant for the next 300 years. Barbara Jean's YouTube channel was now a global phenomenon, and she was currently trying to convince the town council to rename the street the Way We Were Way. Reba stood on her porch, watching the sunset. "You're thinking about the first barbecue, aren't you?" Ted asked, appearing behind her with a glass of wine. 15 times, Reba whispered. "It felt like a lifetime ago. I was so tired, Ted. I felt like I was running a race with no finish line. And now? Now, I'm just enjoying the view. I look at my kids, my grandkids, this loony bin of a family, and I realize that the race wasn't about the finish line. It was about the people running beside me, even the ones with fire extinguishers." Ted smiled and pulled her close. "You did more than just pick up the slack, Reba. You built a world where everyone has a place to be crazy and a place to be loved. Including you? Especially me." They sat there as the stars began to poke through the Houston humidity. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the faint sound of a teenager practicing a very loud guitar solo. It was messy, it was uncontrolled, and it was beautiful. Chapter 30. The Eternal Rhythm. The final chapter of the Heart story hasn't been written yet, because in Houston, the music never really stops. Reba Hart Ted is still the heart of the home. She still hides the chocolate, still manages the books, and still knows exactly when someone is lying about their orange juice intake. Brock still checks the wiring. Barbara Jean still sees visions. Van still dreams of visual impact. And Elizabeth is currently planning a world tour that involves at least 3 llamas. But every Tuesday, the world goes quiet. The red-headed woman and the man with the guitar case find their way to a small booth in a quiet bistro. They don't need to pretend anymore. They don't need to be Russian princesses or Canadian bicycle salesmen. They are just Reba and Ted. She's a survivor, but she's also a teacher, a partner, and a legend. And as the Houston sun sets over the backyard gazebo, she knows that no matter what storm comes next, she has exactly what she needs to face it. Because she's a heart. And a heart never stops loving. The end. The Survivor's Heart. A Houston story. Chapters 1 to 35 remained as previously written. Part 2. The Unfolding Road. Chapter 36. The Morning After Forever. The first year of marriage is often described as a honeymoon phase, but for Reba Hart, now Reba Hart Ashford, it felt more like a delicate architectural renovation. You don't just move a man like Julian Ashford into a house that has been the fortress of a single mother for 2 decades without a few structural groans. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the Houston sun was already beginning to bake the dew off the St. Augustine grass. Reba stood in her kitchen, the familiar smell of coffee filling the air. For 20 years, this had been her sanctuary, the place where she made her battle plans and drank her quietest cups of tea. Now, there was a second coffee mug on the counter, a sleek, black ceramic thing that looked far too modern for her rustic kitchen. Julian walked in, wearing a tailored robe and holding a tablet. "Morning, partner," Julian said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Morning. You're up early. Planning to conquer another zip code," Reba teased, though she leaned into the kiss. "Just reviewing the preliminary plans for the River Oaks renovation. And I was thinking about the guest house." Reba froze, her spoon hovering over the sugar bowl. "The guest house? You mean Brock's habitat?" "I was thinking it might be time for an upgrade. Not just the building, Reba, the situation. Brock's been there for years. He's sober, he's healthy, and he's Brock. But don't you think he needs his own ground? Not just the ground we give him?" Reba sighed, the steam from her coffee fogging her vision. "Julian, Brock is like a decorative ivy. Once he takes root, you can't move him without taking half the siding with you. Besides, Barbara Jean wouldn't know what to do if she couldn't walk across the yard to borrow my dignity every afternoon." "I'm not saying we kick him out," Julian said, putting his tablet down. "I'm saying we help him find a venture, something of his own." Van mentioned that the local junior college is looking for a volunteer coordinator for their athletic department. Brock needs a whistle and a clipboard, Reba. He needs a reason to wear a polo shirt that isn't for a wedding. Reba looked out the window at the guest house. She saw Brock standing on the porch, squinting at the sun, probably wondering if it was too early to check the garden for thematic vegetables. You might be right, Reba admitted, but if this blows up, you're the one who has to explain it to Barbara Jean. I'm not equipped to handle her grief strudel. Chapter 37. The Ghost in the Foundation. While Reba and Julian were navigating the logistics of a blended life, the Heights project was facing a new, phantom threat. It wasn't legal this time, but social. A series of strange occurrences began at the site, small things at first. A sold sign knocked over, a window found open in the middle of the night, a series of spray-painted symbols on the sidewalk that looked more like ancient runes than modern graffiti. Van Montgomery, ever the closing specialist, was the first to report it. Mrs. H. I think the Heights is haunted, Van said, bursting into the office with a frantic energy that suggested he had spent the morning watching ghost hunting documentaries. Van, please. We live in Houston. The only ghosts we have are the spirits of people who died waiting in traffic on I-10, Reba said, not looking up from her ledger. I'm serious. I was doing a final walkthrough on Unit 12 last night, and I heard music. But not radio music. It sounded like an old record player. And the smell. Mrs. H. It smelled like lavender and old books. Reba paused. Lavender and old books. It was a specific combination that triggered a memory she had buried long ago. Did you see anyone, Van? No. But Cooper the dog, you know he wouldn't even go inside. He just sat on the porch and whimpered. Reba stood up, a cold knot forming in her stomach. I'll go down there tonight. Alone. Alone? Mrs. H., you need backup. I have a flashlight and a heavy-duty stapler. The stapler won't work on ghosts, Van. Stay here. Watch the phones. That night, the Heights felt different. The houses stood like sentinels in the moonlight, their clean lines and modern finishes glowing with a silver sheen. Reba walked toward Unit 12, her footsteps echoing on the pavement. As she reached the porch, she smelled it. She pushed the door open. The house was empty, the walls still smelling of fresh paint, but there was a presence. She felt it in the way the air seemed to vibrate. Who's there? Reba asked, her voice steady. A shadow moved in the corner of the living room. It wasn't a ghost. It was a woman, small, frail, and dressed in a vintage floral coat that had seen better days. She was holding a small, battery-operated record player. It was our porch, the woman whispered. Before the glass boxes, my husband and I, we sat right here for 40 years. We grew the lavender. Reba felt her heart soften. This wasn't a legal claim or a corporate attack. It was the human cost of progress. I'm Reba, she said, stepping into the room. I'm the one who sold the house that stood here before. You sold the bones, the woman said, her eyes vacant. But you can't sell the echoes. I just wanted to hear our song one last time before the new people move in with their smart fridges and their lack of history. Reba sat on the floor next to the woman. For the next hour, she didn't talk about square footage or closing costs. She listened to stories of a Houston that existed before the skyscrapers, a city of porches and slow conversations and lavender gardens. When the woman finally left, Reba stood on the porch and looked at the modern development. She realized that Julian was right. The big picture didn't matter if the foundation was underwater. But she also realized that the foundation wasn't just made of concrete, it was made of stories. Chapter 38. The Relapse of Routine. For Cheyenne, the second year of sobriety was in many ways harder than the first. The novelty had worn off. The high of being a newcomer, of getting her chips and her tokens, had been replaced by the long, flat plateau of daily maintenance. Sobriety wasn't a mountain she had climbed. It was a road she was paving while she walked on it. She was in the kitchen, helping Elizabeth with a puzzle, when the itch returned. The sheer, terrifying weight of a Tuesday afternoon where nothing was wrong. Just one, a voice whispered in the back of her mind. Just to make the puzzle more interesting. Just to make the silence less loud. She reached for her purse, her fingers brushing against the amber bottle of booze away. She hadn't taken a pill in months. She felt like she had outgrown them. She felt like she was cured. But as she looked at Elizabeth, she saw her mother's eyes. She saw the survivor in the toddler's determined face as she tried to fit a blue piece into a green hole. Cheyenne picked up the phone and called her sponsor, Kelly. "I'm having a moment," Cheyenne said, her voice trembling. "Where are you?" Kelly asked instantly. "The kitchen. Looking at a puzzle and a cabinet." "Don't look at the cabinet. Look at the puzzle." "Tell me about the puzzle, Cheyenne. What's the picture?" "It's a farm. There's a red barn and a cow that looks like Barbara Jean." Kelly laughed. "Good. Stay on the phone. Tell me about the cow. Tell me every detail until the itch stops." They talked for 40 minutes. By the time they hung up, the itch had subsided into a dull hum. Cheyenne realized that her mother was right. You don't survive the hard way once. You survive the hard way every single day. She didn't take a pill. She didn't reach for the cabinet. She just finished the puzzle. And for Cheyenne, that was a victory greater than any gala or commission. Chapter 39. The Van Montgomery Expansion. Van Montgomery had decided that being a senior partner required a more sophisticated approach to marketing. He had traded his golden retriever for a digital strategy that involved drones, 3D modeling, and what he called the Vanthology. "It's a multi-platform narrative experience," Mrs. H. Van explained, showing her a video on his phone. The video featured a drone flying through the heights, narrated by Van, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound like a nature documentary host.